Thank you for the night's rest, for the breakfast we've had, for the start of a class, and the start of a beautiful new day. Please be with us in Jesus' name, amen. Maybe tomorrow morning I'll just start with a song, but that might not get your attention as much as let us pray. Or maybe I could say, let me tell you a story. How do you like meeting in here for class? You know the real benefit about being in here? Somebody said warmer. What's the other real benefit? That's right. So if you run out of coffee during class and you have to get more, just wait a few minutes. We'll have a break and you can go get some. Now, I don't mind if you go during class. I might have to myself. Yesterday for class, we talked about leadership in the context of what word? Community. If you are going to be a leader, you have to have followers. And leaders grow from the community that produce them, but they also feed back into that community and provide healthy, we hope, healthy leadership that keeps the community healthy to produce another generation of leaders. Now, I'm hearing this kind of has a hollow buzz sound to it. Does anybody else get that from the microphone or from this? Some of you get the hollow zzz, drum sound? Okay, thank you. He'll work on that a little bit. What happens if a community is not producing good leaders is you get leaders that then cannot lead in a healthy way, that lead a community in another unhealthy direction. Can you hear that now? But they can't hear it, so it's too low, they can't hear it.
It's the washer.
What about it?
The washer making that noise more.
Is it really? It's interacting with that. Oh, it's making the drum noise.
Yes.
Okay, well, I hear it up here. Can you hear the microphone now? Okay, you can hear a little bit. Good. Think of a smaller community like a family. If a family starts off you can have someone from a healthy family that, say, gets into some kind of addictive behavior, such as alcohol, and become an alcoholic. And they can come from a healthy family, but if for whatever reason they start playing with alcohol and they become an alcoholic, then they can lead their family down a very unhealthy path. And I know that because I come from a family with a number of alcoholics. And my dad made some very, very great efforts to break that cycle all the way back in the 1970s for our family. And he did a good job, worked very hard, but it takes some extreme effort. But you can have a healthy, relatively healthy community, and someone makes some bad decisions, and they take that family or part of that family down a dangerous path. That is where the community has to continue to police itself and make sure it's healthy, so they produce leaders that are healthy that will then continue to produce healthy leaders that grow up from within that community. You break off, you start an unhealthy cycle, then you can produce generations of people that continue to produce unhealthy leadership styles for the family. And the same thing can happen for a church. Going back to the alcohol illustration, I worked at the rehab center in Cody for 7.5 years, and they taught us there, and we can see it also in our own families. It takes at least 3 generations to break some of the negative side effects of an alcohol addiction. I don't know so much about drugs, but at least an alcohol addiction. Some of the dependency issues, some of the anger and resentment issues, some of those things can take up to 3 generations. If you are an alcoholic, a man, and you have daughters, your daughters are 70% more likely to marry an alcoholic man than a normal woman would be. Normal as in growing up in a family where the father's not an alcoholic. So when one of my friends learned that, he was petrified because he had a daughter. And he said, I've got to get my life straightened out fast to give my daughter a fighting chance. And fortunately, he did straighten out his family situation, and she married very, very well. I've kept up with the family. So it is important that we have healthy communities and that healthy communities produce healthy leaders. So the second thing I want to talk about is the integrity of leaders. Now somebody tell me, what does integrity mean? What is integrity? Scruples? Honor? Honesty? Honest. If you're going to have integrity, you have to have honesty. You have to have scruples, morals. Okay. I guess the definition for me would be when the inside and the outside match. When the inside and the outside are coordinated together. When you look at something on the outside and you perceive the inside to be a certain way based on the outside, and then you check out the outside and it is that way, you would say that has integrity. For example, if you look at a house that's got a beautiful exterior, when you step inside that house, what do you expect? I have done food delivery for benevolence where I go to an apartment and the manager of the apartment keeps the apartment absolutely beautiful, but you step inside. And I remember one time in the wintertime in Cody being almost knocked over by the stench. And in the corner was a huge pile of diapers that family never carried outside. I mean a huge pile of diapers. And that, I would say that lacks integrity because the outside looks inviting, but the inside will literally knock you over from uncleanliness. That lacks integrity. If you see an outside that's beautiful and you step inside and the inside is clean and fresh, you would say that house has integrity. Here's my favorite illustration. A lack of integrity is when you have a beautiful bright red apple and you bite it, take a big bite, and you feel that snap and that pop of a fresh apple, and you grin it, and you grin when you have it because it's so good, and you look inside and there is half a worm. Anybody here had that happen? That apple lacks integrity. Do we need to explain any more what integrity is? Okay. Integrity, when the outside and the inside match. Look at Proverbs chapter 1. The word could be whole or blameless. Whole, meaning the inside and the outside are together. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 3 and part A. The Proverbs are for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair. Right and just and fair. Those are three key words for Proverbs. Right, just, and fair. And if you turn to chapter 2 and verse 4, let's make that chapter 2 and verse... I just saw it. Those same words occur again in chapter 2 and verse 9. If you have wisdom, verse 9 says, you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. And throughout Proverbs, you will see these three words repeat over and over, maybe not in the same sentence, but right could also be upright or righteous, and it means to be in line with. And if you are righteous toward God, you're in line with God. It doesn't mean you're perfect, but it means you're in line with Him in that you're trying to follow His will. If you're in a right relationship with someone else, it means you're in line with them. We get along. We are honest with each other. We don't have any disruption going on between us. We're in a right relationship. So righteous in Proverbs is not so much the righteousness that Paul writes about in the New Testament, but it means to be living in relationship with God. It doesn't necessarily carry yet the connotation of forgiveness of sins. That will come later. But obviously in the Old Testament, they did have animal sacrifices, right, for their sin. But the idea of trying to live for Him, right, just, the idea of just or justice is for working for what is, working for fairness, working for equity. In the Old Testament, you had wealthy farmers, and they were commanded by God to do what with their crop after they went through the first time to harvest it? Leave it for the poor. That was God's way of seeing that everybody got a fair hand. Now, some might be very, very well blessed. But remember we talked yesterday about the conduit, not the Dead Sea. These wealthy people, then wealthy landowners, became the conduit to bless the poor. So in a society or a community that is going to be healthy, you will have people in right relationship with God and with each other. There'll also be people that have a big enough heart to see that those who are marginalized, which we'll talk about later, have a shot. We don't necessarily mean welfare, where you take care of people that do not want to work, but you give them a chance. You're fair. And that actually is the third word, is fair. Fair can also be ethical. Righteous, just, fair, or ethical. Having, another word there could be integrity or virtue. Those are three things that Proverbs wants to do in a person's life. The very opening section of Proverbs says it wants to produce a life that's going to be lived in a community where there is righteousness, justice, and fairness. I will say that there are some people today have picked up on the term justice, and they use the term justice warrior or social justice warrior. Have you heard that term? We have some Jordan Peterson fans in here. I don't know where you're sitting now or even who you are maybe, but he writes about talks about social justice warriors. And the thing about some of them is not all of them come from a biblical perspective, obviously. They don't all come from a perspective of the righteousness that God has in mind. And they may want to be fighting what they think is inequities in society. But really, some of what they're fighting against, some of them, is the old-time principles of hard work that have made the society as good as it is, as fair as it is. So if you think about justice in the Old Testament, that's not necessarily the same as some of the social justice warrior issues today. Just be aware of that. So for integrity, I think this verse right here describes what that is very, very well. Based on this verse, an Old Testament scholar named Bruce Waltke wrote, "The righteous," what does it mean to be righteous? He says, "The righteous are willing to disadvantage themselves to advantage the community, whereas the wicked are willing to disadvantage the community to advantage themselves." Does that statement make sense? You catch that? So a righteous person will give of himself for the good of others, whereas the unrighteous person expects all the others to give of themselves for him. So he's the one that's always wanting to pull out of the pot, but never put anything into the pot. And what a marvelous poetic way of putting that. The righteous will disadvantage themselves for the sake of the community. Why is it that there are people that are 70 and 80 years old that continue to make major contributions to our Christian colleges, to our churches, to our camps like this? Their children are grown. They don't have any little children here anymore. Why do they continue to do that? Because they understand the principle of righteousness, which means they will continue to impose upon themselves, maybe of their time, of their money, of their effort, and share it with a larger community that may never ever know who they are. And they don't care if anybody knows who they are. They know if they bless the community, that is what God expects of them. That's number one. The second thing they realize is if they throw blessings in the air here in Montana, that could in some indirect way affect their grandchildren who are being raised in Montgomery, Alabama. Somebody from here that winds up down there, or they one day wind up here. And those blessings that we throw out to bless it, to advantage the community, has a way of coming back and advantage us in return. That's not the reason why we do it, but that's one of the blessings. That's one of the great ways that God works. You do a kind deed today for someone else, whether they ever know it or not, and God has a way of seeing that comes back to bless your family in some way years from now. And Bruce Waltke, I think, with his statement so beautifully captures this whole concept. The righteous are those who disadvantage themselves for the good of the community. The unrighteous will disadvantage the community, put them in a hardship in order to benefit themselves. When you pick a leader for your local congregation, a Sunday school teacher, someone to work with your youth, an elder, Look for somebody who understands some of these integrity issues. We are working for righteousness, justice, and fairness. We're not social justice warriors who interpret that idea from modern American constructs, but rather from the Bible. We want righteousness, right standing, justice, where we're working for fairness and justice among people, and this word equity or fairness, ethics, honesty, and that we will disadvantage ourselves for the sake of the group. When you do VBS, do you sometimes ask yourselves, why am I staying up till midnight working on this? I don't even have any kids in the program anymore. Do you wonder why you drive a van load of youth to a youth rally when you don't have any youth at the church anymore? Well, it's because you're righteous and you understand that. Is it possible some people are doing that because they want to get something out of it selfishly? Yes, that is possible. But sometimes those people will wear out if you're doing it for a wrong motive. That's why no matter how tired you get, some of you keep working every year. How many of you when VBS comes around you think, we're getting too old for this? But you still do it. Thank you. That's integrity of leadership. That is advantaging the community. Here's a great statement from a guy named Reggie McNeil in a book called A Work of Heart, which is a very good book for leaders. Reggie addresses this idea of righteousness. What does it mean to be a righteous leader? Does that mean you have to be perfect? Have you ever asked anyone in your church to be a deacon or an elder or a Sunday school teacher and they said, well, I don't know that I'm good enough for that? Well, they probably are the right people then. Because if anybody thinks, I'm good enough for that, you better believe I'm ready to be an elder. I'll get this place straightened out in no time. You don't want them, believe me. Is that right, Keith or Bruce? Some of you that are elders? You have somebody that comes in like that, and they're going to bring an agenda that you're going to have a hard time with. Some of your best leaders are the ones that don't think they're fit for the job. Thomas Jefferson did not want to be the president. But during his administration, he got rid of personal income taxes. He got rid of the IRS. He eliminated personal income tax of the federal government. He bought the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the country, and he reduced our national debt by about a half without an income tax. And that man didn't want to be president. Some of your best leaders are the reluctant leaders that just don't know if they're ready for it. These guys we've been electing that want to be the president, so want to be a senator, want to be a congressman. Have they done half as good a job as Thomas Jefferson, who didn't want to be? Well, just look at your tax bill this year, and there's your answer. Sometimes leaders don't think they're qualified. It may be that they're really not. What does it mean to be righteous? Does it have to mean you have to be perfect? Well, here's what this Reggie McNeil wrote. All leaders limp. Leaders become leaders in part because they are willing to wrestle with who they are, who they want to become, and how they can overcome some deficit in their own lives. They often need to achieve, need to be admired, even loved, need to bring order to some chaos that is within them. So there's the weak part of the leader. I want to be loved. I want people to think I'm doing a good job. I want them to say, well done. There's the insecurity in the leader that needs to be affirmed. Yes, that can be in the leader, even a good leader. It's when it gets out of balance that it can become dangerous. And almost always these vulnerabilities are established in the leader's family of origin, the early community that begins to shape the leader's heart before the young child can even speak. But what Reggie's addressing, and we'll have another quote on that at the end, is that even righteous leaders limp. We are not looking for people that are perfect. We are looking for people that are moving in the right direction. That idea helps me when you read Romans chapters, say, 6, 7, and 8, where it talks about the Spirit of God and how the Spirit, gives us direction and guidance, and how the Spirit does today what the law was unable to do in the Old Testament. And you think, what is Paul saying about the Spirit? And one of the books I read that helped me said, the idea of Spirit there is orientation. It's not that the Holy Spirit comes into your life and says, Curtis, you are going to be a Christian whether you want to be or not. You are going to live better whether you want to or not. You are going to climb T-shirt mountain whether you want to or not. Unless the director says the rocks are unstable, you can't. Otherwise, you're going to. And you are going to be a preacher. And no, wait a minute. I'm not even a Christian yet. What is all this? Okay, the idea of the Holy Spirit directing your life, I don't think means he comes into your life and he overpowers you. Because obviously we can give in to sin, can't we? But I think what it means to be led by the Spirit is the orientation that we have in the direction that we're following. And if we're moving toward God, the Spirit is at work in our lives in a positive way. Leading us, how? I don't know all the ways how. But I think one of the ways he can work is right through a camp like this, through a healthy youth group, through a healthy church. And he's influencing us in this direction. And the righteous person is going to limp. Jacob limped. But we can still be righteous leaders. Well, how do we begin developing integrity? What do I have, 20 more minutes left of this session? 15? Okay. So there's 6, so that gives me, say, 2.5 minutes apiece. Okay. Here's 6 steps in the process in Proverbs that promote character development. Number one, for character development in Proverbs, listen to instruction. Proverbs 19:20, listen to advice and accept instruction, and in the end you will be wise. Proverbs 19:20, willingness to listen. We talked about that some yesterday. I try to be careful with stories that I tell because I don't want somebody to say, oh, I know what you're talking about. I know who that is. That can be very dangerous. And I have 4 people here from my home congregation, so I'll have to tell a story. Bruce, I just don't want them to know it's you. I don't know how to tell this. But I remember talking to a leader one time, and it's neither one of these guys, and I said, let's call the people in and ask them what they think. And this leader said, why do we need to listen to them? We already know what they think. Okay, that tells me there's a lot to learn there about being a leader. Because you know as a parent that leading in your own home, even though you're the mother and the father, and there are times we have to say, you will do it because I am the mother or I am the father, and you have to do what we say. There are times you have to do that when they're little, right? They want to go play in the road. Is that a time to, get a consensus of opinion? No. That's a time right then to use your parental authority and instruct through means other than just instruction. That is putting the hand to the bottom and letting them know you will listen to mommy's voice. You will listen to daddy's voice. There are times we have to pull rank. Otherwise, we're not parenting. But then there's other times we have to listen. Like in the story of the second one on Proverbs there in Charging Grizzlies. I've got a story in there about a father. It's from a book called Christ at the Coffee House. There was a father who put his son to bed, and he said he needed water. So the dad got him water. Then he needed to go to the bathroom, so he let him go to the bathroom. Then he needed more water. And the dad said, son, we're not playing this game. He finally spanked the boy and put him back to bed, and the boy got up again. And he said it was so out of character for the son that he said, something told me I better listen to my son. So he held him and he said, young man, what's going on? And he said, Daddy, there's a monster in my room. Well, was there a monster in his room? No. What made him think there was a monster? Who knows? A television show he watched? Something an older kid told him? You better watch out. The monster's going to get you tonight. And I've had younger cousins. I've told that stuff too, and I'll tell you it does work. We won't go there right now, but it does work. So whatever it was, this boy was so scared that even with the spanking, he was willing to get up and risk another one because of fear. So his dad said, I better listen. And when he listened to his son, he then was able to completely rework how he approached it. He said, son, I'll tell you what, you and me, we're bigger than that monster. When that monster shows up, you tell him, if he doesn't leave, your daddy's going to come in there and punch him in the nose. The boy went to bed and fell right asleep. The next morning he said, son, what happened? He says, I punched that monster right in the nose. Okay. That father was leading his family, and he found it very appropriate to listen. And I think in churches we'll do the same thing. We'll find it appropriate to listen. Because oftentimes behind the complaints of some of our members, behind the cries, there's something very deeply out of order, something that very deeply in their being hurts them. And we can help a lot more by listening than just by giving orders. And being a leader isn't just about giving orders anyway, is it? I have friends in the military. There are times when they have to give an order, charge, and there's no room for debate. But then there are other times when an older commander has to go to his 18-year-old and says, "What's wrong, son?" And the 18-year-old breaks down and cries and he says, "I'm afraid." And then the older officer says, "Son, I am too. We'll do this together." There's not a setting where leaders at some point or another don't have to listen. And it starts out when we're young, listening to instruction, to train us in integrity, and then even when we become a leader, we continue to listen. Number 2, accept rebuke. Accept rebuke. Proverbs 19:25, flog a mocker, and the simple will learn prudence. Rebuke a discerning man, and he will gain knowledge. This has to be one of my favorite verses in Proverbs. Proverbs 19:25, flog a mocker, and the simple will learn prudence. A mocker is kind of like a fool on steroids. A fool simply will not listen. A mocker knows he's not listening, and he's proud of it. So if you can just take a fool and just pump him up full of more foolishness, he eventually becomes a mocker. So what Solomon says is, you have somebody that's a mocker, you can't help him. Proverbs is not written for the fool. Proverbs is written for the young, the simple, and the wise. It is not written for the fool. You know why? They won't listen to it. So as much as this book is their antidote, their medicine for life, they will not take it. So what do you do with the mocker? Proverbs says, if this, would you be our illustration for a moment?
I have a choice.
If this man is a mocker, thank you. If this man is a mocker, beat him. It's not going to do him any good. But Curtis over here is going to go, whoa. I don't want that to happen to me. So the simple will learn when you punish the mocker. That's what he says. And it's like the young mother that took her lovely, darling little 5-year-old sensitive daughter to kindergarten, put her in the chair and turned to the teacher and said, "My Susie is so sensitive. If she misbehaves, spank the girl next to her and she'll still cry." That's what Proverbs is saying works. Number 3 is confession. Confession. He who conceals his sins does not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces their sins finds mercy. Proverbs 28:13. You see, the leaders who limp because they have a spiritual deficit, they have an anger problem, they have some issue in their life, but overall their direction is toward God, and you recognize them as being more mature, we're going to appoint them as a leader, they still limp and they have weaknesses. And they'll still sin. So what happens when they do? It's not that they don't have sin. It's that they're willing to confess their sin when it's pointed out to them and repent of it. That's the difference. They don't cover it up. They confess it. And if nothing else, what you see in that man or that woman is honesty. And you have to respect honesty. Number 4, be patient with delayed promises. Be patient with delayed promises. I'll explain that. Proverbs 3, verses 9 through 10 says, "Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Give to the Lord of your wealth, and your wealth will increase." How many of you have given to the Lord regularly for a number of years, but you don't see the increase in the wealth that you would enjoy seeing right now? There's 2 of us. 3 of us. Good for the rest of you. Tell me how much percent do you give to get back extra? For many of us, you put in and you give, and you may not see for a long time an increase in ways that you would like to see it. You know, you may be 50 years old and you're still making a car payment. You're still making a house payment. There are some people, have had their houses paid off when they were 35 and 40. I know a couple. Why are you still making a house payment at your age? Why hadn't that blessing of that amount come to you? Well, this is where you get back to some of the questions of selfishness. All right, if I give X amount to the Lord and he blesses that with X amount, then in 10 years I should have this much. That's wrong, right? That's manipulating God. That's not giving out of your heart because of joy and love and gratitude. That is manipulation. And this verse is not at all talking about manipulation. When Solomon says, give to the Lord and your vats will overflow, he is telling the Israelites, give to the Lord and he will see that you are taken care of. They did that when they let the land lie fallow, right? Every 7th year they gave rest to the land, which means they had to eat off the food from the 6th year. So from that 6th year, they had to eat the food, that 6th year, then they had to eat it into the 7th year, which was the land of rest. Then they had to eat off of that into the next year as they were growing in the first year of the next 7-year cycle. That 6th year had to carry them, at least in part, for 3 years. God says, if you will serve me faithfully, I will see that that 6th year of growth covers you through all that time. You will not go hungry. What Proverbs is saying is trust in the Lord and give, and he will see that you're taken care of. And what happens in the meantime as you're waiting for abundance, as you're waiting for a pay raise, as you're waiting for that ship to come in? It's during that time, which is called gapping, the gap between the promise and the fulfillment, that we become mature. We learn patience. We trust God even more. We make do with less. We find we can get by on one income. We find we can get by with not enough insurance. We don't want it this way, but we find out the Lord is seeing us through somehow. We don't have to manipulate God. We don't have to make demands on God. We serve God. We give what we can. And we find out during the time from the promise to the fulfillment, in this gap, that could be 50 years long, God takes care of us. And it's that man or that woman who learns that trust in God, who can see through the momentary crises and the things that the drama that seems to erupt every so often. It's the leader that's got the maturity to see through that for the long term that you want guiding your family, guiding your church, guiding your school, guiding your business, right? That's an important one. That's called gapping. Number 5. Integrity develops when we make the proper personal choice or choices. Proverbs 1, I appealed to this yesterday. Proverbs 1 verses 8 through 19. Read this story later. This is just such an amazing story about Solomon warning against joining gangs, violent gangs. But verse 8 says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Fathers and mothers teach. They have to teach or they're not doing their job. But that's only half of this step to wisdom. The other half is the young people need to listen. But if they make bad decisions, verse 18, verse 17, how useless to spread a net in full view of the birds. When you put a net out in front of the birds, Solomon says, what are most birds going to know to do? Stay away. I mentioned having kittens the other day that I've had to catch, and we take to somebody that, Linda right here, her sister took 8 kittens for me on her farm. They feed the kittens on the farm, so I like that. She took 8. I have to set the trap out. There is one kitten that's from an earlier batch that has learned to not trust that trap no matter how good the food smells. That's the one I want to catch the most, but I can't. He'll sit there, it's like he's looking at me saying, you must think I'm pretty stupid if I'm going to go in that trap. I've seen what happens to everybody else that goes in there, and they never come back. Not me. Solomon says you lay a trap for the birds, and they're going to see it. They're going to know not to go in there. But you lay a trap for young people who aren't thinking, and they're going to step right in that trap and get caught. And you know what that says about us? We're dumber than birds. We'll say if some bird, oh, they're just a bird brain, right? Or if someone, they're a bird brain. Actually, bird brains have more brains than some of us who step with our eyes open into the traps that catch us in sin and all kinds of failures. Don't do what he says. Your personal choices affect that. These men who lie in wait, these men who are criminals, lie in wait for their own blood. They waylay, that is, they knock in the head. Only themselves. Verse 19, such is the end of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the lives of those who get it. Your personal choices feed your integrity as a leader. And finally, number 6 is modeling. Proverbs 11:14. Who do we follow as our model? Who sets the example that we base our life upon? And I don't have time to read that verse. There's the bell. But that is Proverbs 11:14. There are 6 steps in Proverbs to developing integrity as a leader. And we will pick up after the break talking about modeling. Thank you.